All right, here we are, everyone. 8-2b, factoring. Factor a monomial from a polynomial. Factoring is going to be a major part of the second half of this unit. Um, so factoring is pretty much we're undoing multiplying. It's kind of like division. It's undistributing in a way. All right. So our objective is we want to factor a monomial from a polynomial, and we're going to use GCFs, greatest common factors. They're actually going to come into play. So here's what factoring is. Factoring a polynomial completely reverses the multiplication process. So it is kind of like division. We're taking it out. When we factor a monomial from a polynomial, what we want to do first is to find the GCF. So what I want to do briefly is review GCF. All right, so here what is the GCF, or greatest common factor, of 36 and 42? And right away, a number might pop up. But I want to show you a way to do that that will be helpful when we get to these polynomials with variables and whatnot. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a factor tree. All right, I broke it down into what it multiplies by, and then down here I'm writing the prime factorization, meaning I circle all of the prime numbers in the factor tree, and I rewrite them in order from least to greatest. I'm going to go and do the same exact thing for 42. If it breaks down to 7 and 6, then I can break 6 down into 2 and 3, and here are my prime numbers. So the prime factorization for 42 would be 2 times 3 times 7. And now the great thing about the greatest common factor is now I look, what do they have in common? They have a 2 in common. What else do they have in common? Another 2? Nope. A 3? Yeah, oh yeah, they both have it. They have a 2 and a 3 in common, which means their greatest common factor, when I multiply those two factors, their greatest common factor is 6. So this works for any set of numbers. If you break it down into a factor tree, find the prime factorizations and see what repeats in both lists, multiply it out, and that would be the GCF. Now, here we are. Let's get crazy. The GCF of 5x cubed plus 25x squared plus 45x. And what that means is, what does each of these terms have in common? All right. So what we're going to do first is listing the prime factors, meaning I'm going to look at 5. Can I break that down? Well, it breaks down to 5 and 1. I don't want 1. And then x cubed, I'm going to write it out this way, x times x times x. What about 25? Well, 25 breaks down into 5 times 5, 2 5s, right? And then x and x for x squared, that's 2 x's. Now, what about 45? Well, 45, it breaks down to 9 and 5. But 9 can be broken down into 2 3s. 3 times 3 times 5, and then an x. So now, once I have my list, I can go and scan. What do they all have in common? They all have a 5 here. Here's a 5. Here's a 5. So they all have a 5. That's great. Here's an x. Here's an x. Here's an x. They all have one x. Do they all have a second x? Well, the first one has a second x, and the second one has a second x, but the third one doesn't. So that's it. I have to find items that are in all three lists. So 5x is our GCF of that trinomial right there. Okay. So now you try. Take a second or two or a minute. Find the GCF of this. Hopefully you came up with 3x squared. They all have a 3 in the constant, the coefficient, and the largest exponent that they share is a 2. The smallest exponent, I should say, is a 2. All right, so now that we can find the GCF, what we can now do is factor it out. Meaning, I'm going to make it look like I need to distribute when I'm done. All right, we're undoing everything we just learned on A2A. Now we're in A2B. So, what is the factored form of this? And that means factor something out. And we might not even know what that means yet. But the first thing we want to do is find the GCF. Okay, so, I didn't do that yet. What is the GCF here? I'm going to look at my constants, 4, 24, and 8. I can make my lists, or I can kind of see 4 is a small number, so it can't be bigger than 4. Does 4 go into 24? 4 goes into 8? Yes. So it's 4. Now I want to look at my exponents. X to the fifth, x to the third, just an x. The most x's that could be in any of them is just one x, so that's why the GCF is just 4x. Meaning there's a 4x in the first term, there's a 4x in the second term, and there's a 4x in the third term. Now let me show you what it looks like, what we're going to do when we factor it out. So now I want to factor out that 4x from the polynomial. So I'm going to look at each piece. I want to hide some things here so I don't get ahead of myself. What times 4x will give me 4x to the fifth, meaning my first term? What times this? What could I multiply by to get 4x to the fifth? Well, I don't need a coefficient, so I could just put 1, right? Because 4 times 1 will give me my 1. And now x times what gives me x to the fifth? Well, that would be x to the fourth. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get rid of this 1 because I don't really need it. So x to the fourth times 4x gives me 4x to the fifth. Now I'm going to go to do that for my next term, negative 24x cubed. What times 4x will give me negative 24x cubed? Same way I'm going to start. I'm going to look at my coefficient. 4 times what gives me negative 24? What do I have to multiply 4 by to get negative 24? Negative 6, good. And now I have x. What do I need to multiply by to get x cubed? Well, this is really a 1. I need to get it to a 3. I need 2 more. So this has to be 6x squared. And now my last piece is 8x. What times 4x will give me 8x? Well, look at my coefficients again. 4 times what gives me 8? That's a 2. I have an x, and I want to get to an x. I don't need any other x's. Okay? So now what that leads me with is, where am I? Here I am. This factored form would be the 4x, the original GCF, times x to the fourth, oops, it came apart on me, minus 6x squared, and then I have to make room for my plus 2. So now this is the factored form of this. It looks like what we started with in the beginning of 8.2. All right, this is a monomial multiplied by the trinomial, and I get the ending trinomial. What we're working on now is undoing that, working backwards. After you learn to add, then you learn how to subtract. Same thing with multiply, then you learn to divide. Now we're learning to factor in algebra. So let's take a look here. What's the factored form of this? Step 1, find the GCF. Go. Hopefully you came up with 3x squared. And now another way to kind of look at this, is 3x squared times what gives me here. So like I want to distribute and get that as my answer. Okay, so I know 3 times what gives me 9 has to be 3. X squared times what gives me x to the 16th. Recall, we add our exponents when I multiply, so that has to be a 14. What about the next piece? What's the next piece going to be? Hopefully you came up with plus 5x squared. And our last piece, just a 4. I already have an x squared. That has an x squared. I don't need any x's. And that's factoring using GCF. We're factoring out a monomial out in front. That's it. Your turn to try some more.